Her Bak Egyptian Initiate, 5th day. Her Bak tried to envisage the connection between the human personality and its spiritual elements Ba and Ka. How can they live separately yet find each other again? How can the me, having neither its Ba nor its Ka, seek and recover them? Your question lacks depth, answered the sage. You look at effects without having examined the causes. The key to all problems is the problem of consciousness. The first business of consciousness is perception, the second, registration. With the plant, perception is an organic necessity. Lacking water, a tree withers. It registers the withering. The effect in consciousness will be a pushing of the roots deeper. Perception and registration in this sense constitute a progression of consciousness in every kingdom and every live creature from the most primitive up to man. And all these degrees of consciousness are found in man, who is for the most part unaware of it. But note that the whole possibility of consciousness calls for a process of perception, with an instrument for the purpose and a centre of registration, of which the human being has several. The brain that registers ideas is the least durable seat of memory because, dependent as it is on brain matter, memory ceases at death with the organ that was its instrument. When in order to recall an item of knowledge we appeal to memory and other cerebral faculties, When in order to recall an item of knowledge we appeal to memory and other cerebral faculties, it shows that such knowledge is not yet written into the deeper consciousness that survives bodily death. If what we know is to last, the getting of it must have affected us in such a way that we can no longer exist without taking account of it. It must have penetrated the entire being and reached into the non-mortal constituents. Organic consciousness is the consciousness that is innate in all kingdoms. It appears as instinct. In the individual, it is the function consciousness that finds expression in appetites and passional tendencies. The relation between instinctive, passional, and cerebral consciousness brings about emotional and vital consciousness. What the brain records of an emotion memory disappears on the death of the organ. But what, in the emotional sphere, is caused by life consciousness and the organic, instinctive and passional appetites makes its impression in another mode and lasts a longer or shorter time after death. The sphere or mode of registration that pertains to acquired consciousness changes with the evolution of the creature, passing from a physical event to states that are less and less corporal. This, true as regards organic functions, is true also as regards higher states created in man by the spiritual quickening that is proper to him. Consciousness evolves throughout nature. In man, it reaches the possibility of liberation, freedom in handling personal experience, which is the mastery or consciousness of all degrees of consciousness. What is the privilege of higher man? Asked Her Bak. Obviously, it is individualized consciousness. Throughout this progress, from the most primitive organism to man, it leaves traces of a lower instinctive consciousness behind it. But after a man's death, it quits the body and lower cars and awaits the discarnate entity in the higher world to which it belongs. A man may accept or refuse relations with this higher consciousness and its quickening action. It is the frequency and intensity of such relations that constitute the richness or poverty of his sense of responsibility as to the choice of motives he will obey. This sense is the agent of the highest consciousness. Little by little, it teaches a man the connection between cause and effect. The man who feels himself responsible without excuse for failure, if he yields to instinct, writes the meaning of experience into his consciousness in indelible characters. This is the third mode of registration. Now, let us look at the effects of the various procedures. As to the cerebral memory that doesn't survive death, you are simply to note that if we call it sekor, we also use this word for the second memory, the writing of innate tendencies into the car that is held in incarnation and the inscription of instinctive consciousness acquired during the life. This takes place in the shade, the dead man's instinctive and emotional body, and because of this process, his image and likeness. The organic consciousness of the viscera, which embody the four great functions of animal existence, may be distinguished. The viscera are usually taken from the mummy, embalmed and enclosed in separate jars because they don't follow the same process of evolution. If a man has been aware of these functional entities during life, they become subtilized constituents of his future being. This is what is meant when they are shown lifted up on a lotus before the throne of Osiris. If not, they return into the consciousness of nature. The organic consciousness, the organic consciousnesses constitute the animal cars and are part, along with the shade, of the dead man's lower car. I have described the third memory and sphere of registration as taking into consciousness of the real meaning of experience. Tek is the site of this heart consciousness, which is related with the highest part of the man's spiritual being and his higher car. But it is in touch with the lower car, the aspect of Ptah imprisoned, which the consciousness of the spiritual car alone can liberate with the help of Ba, thanks to the affinity of the one with the characteristics of the other. This is what we depict by the image of the bird's soul that returns to range about in the tomb, hoping the shade will emerge free. It is time now to speak of the symbolism that brings together all the phases of the drama in which the dead man's fate is decided. We show him present at the weighing of his heart and in the presence of Ma'at, Thoth, and sometimes Anubis. Generally present are also two whom we shall know shortly, Renenutet and Meskhent, Shai, the dead man's destiny in his own form or as a block with human head, and Ba, the bird's soul perched apart on a door or sanctuary. A monster of animal nature opens his jaws to swallow, reabsorb everything in the man that hasn't been integrated. It is called Amit, or Am-Muit, the devourer. Is the greed of nature, ever ready to reintegrate with its own element all that becomes dissociated in the process of decomposition. Its anomalous structure, crocodile's head, lion's chest, hippopotamus's hindquarters, signify elemental states, each of which absorb what belongs to it. Now look at what is being weighed. A heart on one plate of the balance, a feather or an image of Ma'at on the other. But don't overlook the third object, the plummet or weight attached to a line. This often takes the shape of a heart and is called Tek, which also means drunkenness, saturation by impurity, prohibition. It is the heart, Ab, sometimes called Hati, occult centre of the emotional life, that is being weighed. The counterweight that, quote, judges, unquote, the heart is Ma'at, symbolised by the feather. But Ma'at herself is present, though not the same Ma'at. One is the divine universal principle, while the other, who counterbalances the heart, is the individual Ma'at whom the dead man should have realised in himself. Listen to what our sages have taught on this subject, for it is the highest in our theology. Ma'at is cosmic consciousness, universal ideation, essential wisdom, proceeding ceaselessly from divine Ra, whose nourishment she is. From Ma'at come all incarnate rays of wisdom, all human cars. That is why the dead man is sometimes made to say, I come from Ra's mouth. Ma'at, then, is in truth the highest consciousness man can make his own. That which comes to him at his quickening. She is the agent and the vehicle of Ra's essence, and a man only lives in spirit when his lower car unites with a higher. The ray of Ma'at becomes his own Ma'at in his own consciousness. There is an image of Ma'at symbolised by a feather, which looks a bit like a kneeling Isis with wings. Think this well over. Nothing can be assimilated to Ma'at that is not of Ma'at's nature, true and indestructible consciousness. All that comes of the lower personality, all that is mortal, fictitious, cerebral, alien to the individual's essential car, is rejected. Whence the, quote, judgment of Ma'at, unquote, for Ma'at, judgment of the heart in his own word, in the man in whom man has become conscious and realised. If the heart, centre of emotional and intuitive life, is not identified with this word, there is grave risk that it will be lost in the adventure of the duat. Thus, it is essential that you should recognise the functions of the two hearts that play a leading part in your life. But Master, I haven't got two hearts, Her Bak protested. No, not I, but hieroglyphs say it, the sage replied. I am not speaking now of your spiritual and fleshy hearts. For the one is nothing but the symbol and physical organ of the other. By the, quote, second, unquote, heart, I mean that which governs the oscillations of the balance, the plummet, to which the netter who supervises the weighing gives all his attention. The symbolism of the plummet, Tek, touches one of our most sacred mysteries. Still, I must speak of it, or you will find everything I have yet to say incomprehensible. I will try to clarify matters by the parallel between its symbolism and that of the word Ab. In both, there is a double play of word and idea which puts the physical and psychic functions or states in relation with one another and with an object or organ that explains the double meaning, concrete or abstract. In the words Ab, thirst, and Ab, desire, although their determinants may differ, it is heart that gives exactly the relation between them. Capital A, little b, written with the concrete A with a apostrophe over the top, means thirst. Ab with the abstract A means desire. This dual aspect of a function physical need on the one hand and emotional desire on the other is found again in the meaning given to the word ab, heart, according as one has in mind the organic heart that drinks blood or the centre of psychic activity. The symbolism of tek likewise contains a double play between the word for an object, tek, and the state of drunkenness or saturation denoted by its homonym between the role of the plummet, tek, and the absorptive capacity implied by tek as a state of saturation. There is then a direct relation between these two ideas. Drunkenness conveys the idea of imbibition to saturation point. Again, when something dry is soaked in liquid to saturation point, it can't absorb anymore, like a sponge in water put in Her Bak. The image won't do. There is no question here of container and contained. If one said that a jar filled with water was tek, it would be wrong. The idea of drunkenness suggests extinction of a fire. A thing's absorption capacity depends on the measure of its dryness caused by its inner fire. The fire that brings on dryness is Seth. Whether in the sands of the desert or in a consuming fever, or the bitterness of egotistical passion, it is always Seth's fire that tends to make use of natural forces on behalf of natural passions that are its fuel. As against this destructive activity, our symbolism presents the comprehensive action of, quote, the waters of heaven and earth, unquote. The, quote, water of rejuvenation, unquote, that revives the dead, the tears of Isis, and the, quote, new water, unquote, of happy, that restores vegetation to arid earth. Next, imbibition supposes an absorption capacity in that which drinks the reviving water. The greater as the fire is, the more intense. It is true then to say that the absorption capacity is a measure of the fire that evoked compensation. It is part of the plummet to show this. The laws of generation show that every living thing is formed by the alternate action of fire and water. Seth's fire never seeks of itself to absorb the compensating water, but rather to consume everything and increase its combustibility. But in a living creature, its very aggressiveness awakens a reactive and defensive power which calls out the compensating factor. It is this reaction that makes the creature absorbent to the point of satiation. I can't pronounce that word. I'm going to say satiation because I can't pronounce that. Or exhaustion of the fire's greed. Satiety, sorry. The reaction can work in the reverse sense if the inimical factor becomes predominant. Tek, then, in the process of generation, as in the weighing, is the witness or intermediary that guarantees the free play of contrary forces in the measure that is possible. The part of witness between the emotive heart ab on one plate of the balance and the individual ma'at on the other gives tek an important part also in the determination of the destiny shy, sometimes shown in the judgment scene as a block with human head. Shy measures the individual destiny, the foreordination of which prenatal and natal Seshat writes in the embryo, and the man's will and actions sign it daily. I see that, said Her Bak. But I still find the spiritual aspect of the heart a riddle. Even more enigmatic are the words, quote, "O my heart of my mother, you are the car of my metamorphosis," unquote. Consider deeply what has just been explained, answered the sage. You will understand if you study the parallel between the role of the heart, Ab, and the role of Tek once more. The heart, Ab, is the equilibrating agent of the bloodstream. Tek, that of the elements fire and water in every generative process, witness and intermediary as regards their fluctuations. Now, just as Ab means organ as well as a function, so there necessarily exists in the human organism a centre that performs the Tek function, and an equivalence of function between a man and his car. The higher car plays an analogous part with that of the, quote, water of rejuvenation, unquote. The lower car, which compromises the psychic characteristics of the personality and suffers the animal urges of the organism, suffers also the aggressiveness of Seth's fire and the compensating reaction. Tek, point of contact between these impulsions of the two cars, is their witness. It plays the part of a head consciousness that keeps the record of this perpetual vital experience and in consequence survives death. Likewise, it is the, quote, car of the changes, unquote, that incarnates in the embryo, ever-present witness of the successive metamorphosis of the creature. This throws light, said Her Bak, on the text that troubles me. Quote, "O heart of my mother, O car of my transformations," unquote. But as to the heart, the complexity of the subject still leaves me in some confusion. It isn't surprising. Your difficulty is an imagination that dissects and labels the constituents of a spiritual being. All is in everything. Each part contains the principle of the others, with accent on properties that are its own. Cut off a man's leg and the physical member disappears. Not so the principle which lives on, so that the man feels sensation as if the leg had never been amputated. Don't assume discontinuity between various states of the organism, from the most material to the most spiritual. Every part of the being, physical or spiritual, shares its entirety with all the more reason. Do we say the heart, a man's sun, in a physical sense as well as in reality, cannot be independent of the rest of him, any more than the sun is independent of earth. Precisely. There are continual exchanges between them on which the harmony of the system depends. In the formation of the universe, all necessarily becomes in accordance with one soul harmony. If the planets have a share in the sun's heart, they themselves have a sun in their own. Man's constitutive elements are in relation with their cosmic analogues. Your divine car, ray of universal Ma'at, and your Ba are in the same relations with spirit as those which link Ma'at with the divine Ra, whose daughter and nourishment she is. Your physical heart, in respect, that is, a sun in your body, contains the double active-passive principle we depict as solar egg surmounted by a crescent moon. The heart in its passive or lunar state is feminine, maternal, so that in this aspect I can say, quote, the mother is in the heart, unquote. But if I wish to separate the idea of mother and study her in herself, then the heart is in the mother. This exasperated Her Bak. What use are these riddles except to complicate what is already complicated enough? You ask to have the mysteries explained. It is your wish that I should use the superficial formulas of the peristyle? Crestfallen, the disciple bowed. Solar activity in the heart, the master continued, gives the creature form and makes him tributary to Ra. Lunar passivity gives understanding if it reflects light. Solar activity brings light if passivity elicits it. Crossing is the law of laws. This is the key to all enigmas. Enigmas are for those who have the key. Logic is for the blind who only touch the ground with their stick. The master fell silent. Eyes closed, Her Bak wrote these principles in his consciousness, hoping for confirmation in that experience. At last, calm, respectful, he spoke. I have but glimpsed what is hidden in the imagery of the heart, but I see already what accusation heart consciousness would bring against my human heart if it rejected this lesson. Every detail in the judgment scene must be thought out. Thank you indeed for what you show me. May I hear again what part Inek plays? The me, answered the sage, is the bearer of the name Ren, who stands helpless at the weighing. The name is the word of the human personality manifest. Correctly given, it should express his car and his nature. It is the magic formula that preserves his image in man's memory. It is the clothing of Inek. That is why, when this egotistical me effaces itself and a man becomes conscious of his real aim, which lies in selflessness, we modify his name so as to put it in harmony with his true being and function. Why does the bird's soul stand aside during the weighing? The divine soul is neutral, impassible, indifferent to personal matters. If a man has failed to cultivate the affinity of his car for the soul, if he hasn't established by constant appeal to his spiritual being a relation of reciprocal consciousness, the soul returns to its own country and its unified being can't be realised. You haven't explained the role of the two personages, Meskhent and Renenutet, who attended the weighing. Her Bak, you ask too much for one day. Moreover, you wouldn't recognise those two without having understood what we mean by, quote, forms, envelopes and skins, unquote. If you wish to speak of a thing as eyes and fingers perceive it, how do you name it? We have several words. Those that matter are irw, kud, sem. There is a great difference between these words, whose sense the profane often distort. In sem, is what retains form. Sem, in its absolute meaning, is, quote, to make a thing take form, unquote. Form specified by S. Sm also means to bless, put in Her Bak. In reference to the spiritual meaning, if you wish to learn wisdom through language, you should look for the basic meaning of syllables and not be led astray by vulgar uses that enable us to convey secret teachings and veil them at the same time. The basic principle of form is expressed by kud, that's QD, the essential character of the thing, the innate form round which the apparent form is constructed. The absolute meaning of irw, which is IRW, is the present state which has been made, shaped, state and quality being changeable because not innate but acquired. Our texts play constantly on these words. See that you don't neglect them. Doesn't the word kefru refer to form. Kepher is the beginning of form, the manifestation of change. There is subtlety in our thinking that comes not from a child's game of analysis, but from knowledge of the profound motive that appearance hides, and we try by choice of words and images to awaken discernment in the reader. Our masters always considered what is contained and what contains. What is contained is what is hidden. What contains is what hides. Thus, as regards the human embryo, anum is the skin, while dmn is what it hides. Everything ammon formed, membrane, air, water with the stable element mn, mn, contained in ammon. Ken is our leading symbol for that which encloses and for the natural force that makes its own envelope. This force is the reactive energy nek, the effect of which is expressed by the word necked. The symbol of Ken is a quadruped's skin, all but the head. It took and has kept that form because the skin is an emanation of the animal nature. This shows the meaning of envelope and skin. Skin takes an impression of personal characteristics, which is why it serves as a symbol in the funeral scene of the Tikenu, and in the mysteries of Abydos, which demonstrate the necessity of, quote, returning into the skin, unquote, to be reborn to a new life. This isn't purely a notional image. The skin is the living and perceptible image of the imperceptible envelopes that preserve a man's form. Ken is the perfect material expression of this because it shows the identity of within and without, this being the creature of that. In speaking of within, I don't only mean the organic body, but the vital powers and the actions of the two hearts, tek and ab, the factors that express individual characteristics and qualities, just as the skin, ken, preserves the animal form, so the invisible envelopes that emanate from a man, while part of his inner being preserve impressions after death. They are centres of registration. How is it that we can't perceive these envelopes? Asked Her Bak. Can you see the air you breathe? Yet you are aware of it, as you are aware of a man's sympathetic or repellent atmosphere. You must come back to the Medunetas if you are not to mistake what we mean by envelopes. The causal principle of an envelope is WT. Try to see the profound meaning of this. We depict WT by an empty skin, which is shown sometimes wrapped round a stem rising from a pot. Another image for it is the principle of the gland. WT means limitation. Definition of a space by limitation in matter, whence the use of this word for embalming, which holds the mummy in a condition of incorruptibility and preserves its form in bandages. For the same reason, Wut signifies the Sethian skin of Anubis that holds the spirit in prison. Wut is heaven enclosed, a thing limited by volume and that which takes volume. It is the germinal idea of an organ, gland and incarnate function. That is why we say the shade is purified if there is no wut left in it. That is to say, no germ of an organ or animal function in a state of becoming. Now consider all words constructed on the wut idea. Nut or newt is the energetic aerial container of all the wut in the world. Moot Moot is the material container of wut that preserves form and fixes it in a containing space. Tuut is the manifest form of an image in which wut is displayed. Sut is wut's concrete specification. Finally, if you recall the dual principle, capital S, capital H, you will see that the egg, sut, is the perfect type of wut, concretized and quickened by those two vital and essential principles. This will corroborate for you the exact meaning of sa, in which wut is replaced by a, the letter of individuality. You won't find the t of concretion. Sa is the state of the man who, after death, has kept the two vital principles together, though not conjoined, as you've heard. It is interesting that we define sut by the form of an egg and sa the seal that fastens an envelope. Our ancient text often speaks of the dead man who must break his egg. It happens in such texts that sw is given by the sign for a city, nut or NWT. It isn't a question of a city, but of the dead man's own nut, his egg, his surviving envelope. A man's nut is like the celestial nut, whose physical organs are the constellation of the zodiac. Their functions differ in man's body as in hers, but their influences interpenetrate, though they can only communicate with essentially identical states and through an intermediary. The heart is in sympathy with the intermediary and plays the same part in man's body as the sun does in our universe. I'm going to stop it there. I'm having the most huge deja vu right now, probably because I'm thinking about the pathworking from the Initiate's way that happens to have egg breaking in it. Anyway,